vehicle now! Call your dog off!
I don't care who you are!
Deploy that dog and you're opening a federal. Hey, call him off! Call him off! Hey, I'm down.
Stay down!
At exactly 6:41 p.m. outside the Rivergate Justice Annex, a parking dispute that should have taken 90 seconds turned into the kind of incident departments spend years trying to bury. It was cold enough that breath showed in the air. The sky was dimming into that early winter blue, and the courthouse lights had just clicked on. Bright, sterile, unforgiving. The body camera would later go viral, not because it was chaotic at first, but because it was slow. You could see the moment ego took control, the moment a simple misunderstanding hardened into something personal, and the moment a trained police dog became a weapon in a dispute that never needed one. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because the middle of this story is where everything flips, and the end of it is where the real consequences begin. Darius Carter wasn't your average 38-year-old. He was a Deputy U.S. Marshal assigned to a regional fugitive task force, one of those jobs where you learn quickly that calm beats volume and patience beats pride. He'd done protective details, prisoner transports, and warrant operations that started with quiet paperwork and ended with doors coming off hinges. He'd testified in federal court enough times to know the difference between an officer making a mistake and an officer choosing to escalate. And he'd learned the hard way that once a situation becomes about respect, it stops being about the law. He also had something most people in that parking lot didn't have. He knew exactly how these incidents get investigated. He knew what gets written down. He knew what gets forgotten. And he knew that the only thing stronger than a bad report is good video. That evening, Carter had one simple mission. He was meeting an assistant U.S. attorney inside the annex to review a case file before a hearing the next morning. Nothing dramatic, no fugitive, no arrest team, just a short stop, park, grab the folder, walk back out, go home. He drove his unmarked government SUV, the kind that looks like any other dark vehicle until you're close enough to see the hidden emergency lights in the federal plate. The lot behind the annex was a weird patchwork of signage. One row said judicial staff only. Another said city fleet. A third had a faded sign that used to mean something, but now was just metal on a pole. Carter circled once, saw a space near the loading area, and pulled in. He wasn't blocking a lane. He wasn't in a handicap spot. He wasn't in a fire zone. He parked cleanly within the lines, killed the engine, and checked the time. And that's when the trigger event happened. A marked city patrol unit rolled in fast, tires crunching gravel, and stopped hard behind him at an angle that wasn't parking enforcement. It was stop. The driver door opened immediately. A second later, the rear door popped, and out came a German shepherd in a working harness. Head low, scanning, tail stiff. The handler held the leash short, like he wanted everyone to see who was in control. Carter didn't panic. His heart didn't race with fear. It raced with recognition. That posture, that angle, that dog already out. It wasn't a friendly check. It was a dominance play. The handler was Officer Mason Russell, mid-30s, stocky build, shaved head, the kind of guy who moved like he expected people to step aside. He'd been a K-9 handler for about 6 years, had a reputation for getting results, and wore that reputation like armor. His dog, Rex, was trained for patrol work, tracking, apprehension, handler protection. The kind of dog that doesn't bark a lot, the kind that doesn't need to, the kind that, when released, commits fully. Russell walked up with Rex at heel, but close enough that the dog's nails clicked on the pavement right beside Carter's door. Carter stepped out slowly, hands visible, palms open, not because he was scared, but because he understood the optics. He wore plain clothes, a dark jacket, jeans, and a badge clipped inside his belt line. His firearm was concealed under his jacket, completely legal, completely normal for his job. "Evening," Carter said. "What's going on?" "You can't park here," Russell replied, not returning the greeting. His tone had that sharp edge of someone already annoyed. "License, registration." Carter blinked once. "This is a government vehicle. I'm here for a meeting." "I said license and registration," Russell repeated, as if volume could substitute for authority. Carter kept his voice level. "Officer, I'm a Deputy U.S. Marshal. My credentials are on me. Your dog is very close. Can you back him up a few feet?" Rex's eyes were locked on Carter's midsection. The dog wasn't lunging, but it was loaded like a spring. Russell didn't move the dog back. Instead, he shortened the leash and stepped half a pace closer, making the space tighter. "This is my stop," Russell said. "I'm not backing anything up. You want to talk? You can talk right there." This is where things started to go wrong for Russell. Because the law doesn't say an officer gets to create danger and then blame you for reacting to it. And a K-9 isn't supposed to be used as a threat tool in a routine parking dispute. But Russell wasn't thinking about policy. He was thinking about compliance. He was thinking about control. And the more Carter stayed calm, the more it seemed to irritate him. Carter nodded slowly. Okay, I'm going to retrieve my credentials. They're in my wallet. Russell's head snapped slightly. Don't reach for anything. Carter froze. Then how would you like me to identify myself? I didn't ask for your job, Russell said. I asked for your license. Carter took a breath. I'm not refusing. I'm asking for clarity. Am I being detained, or is this a parking citation? Russell's jaw tightened. The body camera audio later captured his exhale. Heavy, impatient. You're being detained until I figure out who you are, Russell said. Carter's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. You already have the answer. I'm telling you, I'm offering credentials. This doesn't need to escalate. Quit talking, Russell barked. Hands. Carter lifted both hands higher, palms out at shoulder level. My hands are up. Your dog is within biting distance. Please create space. Rex's ears flicked. Russell didn't create space. He did the opposite. He shifted his stance so the dog's shoulder was almost aligned with Carter's thigh. The leash was short, the harness tight. It looked like a coiled trap. Quick question for you watching. If you were in Carter's shoes, would you step back? Even if stepping back could be seen as resisting? Drop a comment below. Carter tried to de-escalate with the most powerful tool in any encounter. Options. Officer, we can do this easy. You can stand back. I'll show credentials. We're done. Or we can call a supervisor right now. Russell's face changed at the word supervisor. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight tightening around the eyes, a micro-expression that said, don't challenge me in public. We don't need a supervisor, Russell said. We need you to do what you're told. Carter stayed calm. I am, but I'm not going to let your dog bite me over parking. That sentence did something. You could see it in Russell's posture. His shoulders rose, his chin lifted. He didn't like that Carter had named the thing everyone could see. The dog was being used as intimidation. Russell took a step forward and said the line that changed everything. Keep talking, and I'll let him handle it. There are moments in body cam footage where the temperature changes instantly. This was one of them. Carter's voice remained steady, but you could hear the shift. Officer, do not threaten me with force. I am not a threat to you. Russell's hand moved on the leash clip. Not a release yet, just a touch. A reminder, like a finger on a trigger. Carter's eyes dropped briefly, just long enough to track the leash hardware, then returned to Russell's face. If that dog touches me, you're going to have a problem you can't write your way out of. Russell smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thinks the uniform makes them untouchable. And then, as Carter turned his head slightly toward the annex doors, possibly looking for a witness, possibly considering walking inside to find security, Russell said, "He's reaching," even though Carter's hands were still visible. That's the moment the K-9 launched. It happened so fast, the camera barely captured the start. Rex lunged forward with a sound that was half growl, half impact, and clamped onto Carter's left forearm. Teeth sank through the jacket sleeve into flesh. Carter's body jerked, not from panic, but from pain. Sharp, immediate, shocking. He stumbled sideways, trying to keep balance without flailing, because flailing makes it worse. He shouted, not insults, not threats, just the one command any trained handler should obey. Call him off! Call him off now! Russell didn't call him off. Instead, the footage captured Russell stepping backward, maintaining tension on the leash as if he wanted the bite to stay active. Carter tried to pull his arm in, protecting the joint, trying to avoid a tear. Blood started to streak down his wrist almost immediately. Stop resisting, Russell yelled. One of the oldest lines in the book, especially when the person isn't resisting at all. Carter was standing there being bitten, trying not to fall. Resisting what? Carter shouted through clenched teeth. I'm being attacked! Carter's right hand remained open, still not reaching for his concealed weapon, still not making sudden moves, because he understood the nightmare scenario, a federal officer reaching near his waistband while a local cop is screaming gun. Carter chose restraint in a moment where a lot of people would have chosen survival by any means. The dog re-gripped, adjusting its bite, and Carter's knees dipped. You could see his face tighten. Pain, but controlled. He didn't scream like a civilian who's never felt it. He reacted like someone trained. Stabilize, protect, breathe, keep eyes on the threat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was about 6 seconds, Russell yanked the leash and shouted, Out, Rex released, but not cleanly. The dog's teeth dragged along Carter's sleeve as it let go, and Carter's arm recoiled with a visible tremor. Carter stepped back 2 paces, creating distance at last, and his voice stayed level even now. "I am a Deputy U.S. Marshal," he said, each word deliberate. "You just deployed a K-9 on a federal officer for a parking dispute." Russell didn't apologize. He didn't ask if Carter was okay. He didn't even look at the blood. Instead, he said, "You should have complied." That line, more than the bite, was the oh no moment for anyone who understands accountability. Because it showed intent. It showed mindset. It showed that Russell believed force was acceptable for control, not safety. Carter lowered his left arm carefully and lifted his right hand to his inner belt line, very slowly, narrating each movement. "I'm retrieving credentials," he said. "Slowly, you will see a badge wallet." Russell didn't tell him to stop this time. He watched, breathing hard. Carter pulled out a black credential wallet, flipped it open, and held it at chest height. Even in shaky body cam resolution, the gold seal and the words United States Marshal Service were visible. Carter's photo, name, and title were there. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was shock. You could almost hear Russell's brain recalculating. But here's the thing. Shock doesn't automatically create accountability. Sometimes it creates cover-up. Russell's eyes widened for half a second. Then his face hardened again, like he was forcing the emotion back down. "You shouldn't be parked here," he said, quieter now, as if the issue was still the signage. Carter stared at him. Blood dripped onto the pavement. "You attacked me," he said. "You threatened me. You lied on camera, and you did it while I was compliant." Russell's radio crackled. He keyed it, voice suddenly formal. "Need a supervisor to the annex lot. Possible impersonator, subject claims federal credentials." Carter's head snapped slightly. "Impersonator?" he repeated, incredulous. "You're looking at my credentials." Russell didn't answer. He just stood there with Rex at heel, as if the dog hadn't just torn open a man's arm. Within 2 minutes, 2 more city units arrived. One officer, Officer Lena Park, stepped out and immediately looked at Carter's bleeding arm. "Oh my God," she said under her breath, then louder. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need medical?" Carter nodded once, jaw tight. "I need an ambulance, and I need your supervisor, now." Park looked at Russell. Her eyes flicked to Rex, then to the blood, then back to Russell. "Mason, what happened?" Russell answered fast, too fast. "He was reaching. I gave commands. Dog deployed." Park didn't argue out loud, but the body cam caught her hesitation. She looked at Carter's hands, still visible, still calm. She looked at the credential wallet, and you could see her thinking the same thing you're thinking. This story doesn't fit the scene. A sergeant arrived, Sergeant Miguel Alvarez, mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of supervisor who's seen enough to know when something is about to become a nightmare. He approached Carter first. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Alvarez. Who are you with?" Carter raised the credential wallet again. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Darius Carter, Task Force. I'm here for a meeting. Your K-9 handler deployed on me." Alvarez's face tightened. He looked at the credentials, then at the blood, then at Russell. His voice stayed controlled, but it dropped an octave. "Officer Russell, step back." Russell bristled. "Sarge." "Step back," Alvarez repeated, leaving no room. The ambulance arrived and began treating Carter on scene. The medic lifted the sleeve carefully, and the camera caught the puncture wounds. Deep, ragged, with bruising already blooming around the bite. Carter didn't flinch much during the exam, but his breathing was controlled in a way that told you he was riding pain like a wave. Alvarez asked Russell for his statement. Russell gave the same story. Reaching, commands, dog deployed. Alvarez asked, "Reaching for what?" Russell pointed vaguely. "Waistband." Carter, sitting on the curb now, spoke without raising his voice. "My hands were up," he said. "Your officer threatened to deploy. Then he said, 'He's reaching,' even though I wasn't. It's all on camera." Alvarez looked down at Russell's body cam, still recording, red light blinking like an accusation. This is the moment everything changed, because the problem stopped being a bite. It became an interagency incident. A local officer had used force on a federal officer without cause. And the evidence wasn't just Carter's word. It was video. It was audio. It was blood. Carter was transported to the hospital, where doctors cleaned the wound, assessed tendon involvement, and documented everything. That documentation mattered, because Carter wasn't just going to file a complaint. He was going to build a case. Most people in Carter's position might complain informally, call a friend, or accept a quiet apology. But Carter wasn't most people. Within hours, while still in a hospital bandage, he began drafting a timeline. Not emotional, not ranting, clinical, time-stamped, names, badge numbers, witness list, injury photos, medical report request, body cam preservation demand, security camera preservation demand from the annex. His complaint wasn't just, "I got hurt." It was a structured document that read like something a federal investigator would want handed to them on day one. It demanded that the city preserve all video, dispatch logs, and K-9 training records. It requested the handler's use of force history. It requested any prior complaints involving K-9 intimidation. The city received Carter's complaint the next business day. And here's where the story gets unusual. By the end of the week, Officer Russell was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That is fast. Usually these cases crawl, but this one couldn't. The rumor inside the department spread instantly. He bit a Marshal. Whether that's true in legal terms or not, it's true in political terms. Departments can ignore a civilian. They can't ignore a federal agency. Do you think the city did enough by putting him on leave that quickly, or was that just damage control? Let me know in the comments. Behind the scenes, the Annex security director pulled exterior camera angles that showed the lot. It didn't capture audio, but it captured spacing. It showed Carter standing still. It showed Russell stepping into his space. It showed the dog lunge, and it showed how long the bite stayed engaged before the release. An internal affairs investigator watched Russell's body cam once, then again, then brought in a training sergeant to watch it with him. Not because they enjoyed it, because they needed to know whether they were looking at poor judgment or policy violation. The footage confirmed several issues. First, Russell treated a parking dispute like a high-risk stop, positioning his vehicle to block, introducing the K-9 immediately, and escalating without articulable threat. Second, Russell repeatedly refused reasonable de-escalation requests, including creating space from a potentially dangerous animal. Third, Russell used stop resisting language while the subject was actively being bitten and not displaying assaultive behavior, language that, on camera, read like justification rather than truth. But there was something else that made the case even more serious. On the audio, Russell's threat was clear. "Keep talking and I'll let him handle it." That wasn't a response to danger. That was a punishment for speech. That crossed into civil rights territory fast. Within 2 weeks, a federal review began. Not a flashy press conference, not a headline at first, quiet calls, requests for documents, a preservation letter, a meeting between city legal counsel and federal attorneys. The kind of process that happens when an incident triggers concerns about excessive force and potential violations under color of law. The investigation moved quickly, about 6 weeks from incident to findings. For this kind of case, that's lightning. And it moved fast for one reason. Everything was documented. Everything was recorded. Everything was undeniable. The city released a brief statement first. They were aware of the incident, reviewing all facts, and committed to transparency. The usual language. But internally, the determinations were harsher. The review found that Russell's deployment was not supported by the threat level. It found that Russell's commands and narrative did not match the video, and it found that his handling of the K-9 increased risk to everyone in the scene, including other officers. The recommendation was termination. Officer Russell resigned before the formal termination paperwork finalized. That's another common move. Resigning can sometimes preserve certain benefits or avoid the word fired in a personnel record. But resignation doesn't erase video, and it doesn't erase injury. Carter didn't stop with internal discipline. He filed formal notice of intent to pursue action, outlining injury, loss of function, and the broader implications of using a police dog as a compliance tool. He also requested that the federal task force suspend cooperation with Russell's unit until policy changes were implemented. When word got out that the footage existed, the city initially resisted releasing it publicly, citing an ongoing investigation. Then a records request hit, then another. Local media started asking, social media started sniffing, and when the footage finally surfaced, it exploded. News outlets picked it up. Commentators froze frames and analyzed body positioning. Law enforcement trainers debated K-9 policy. Civil rights advocates pointed to the threat line as evidence of retaliatory force. And in training rooms, the clip became a what not to do example, because the sequence showed how fast a handler can turn a dog into a weapon when their ego gets involved. Public reaction split the way it always does. Some people praised Carter for staying calm and not escalating with his own weapon even while being attacked. They said his restraint likely prevented a fatal outcome. Others criticized him for arguing at all, saying he should have just complied, as if compliance is a magic spell that prevents harm. Some worried that stories like this would make officers hesitant to use K-9s even when necessary. Others responded, good. If a tool can't be used responsibly, it shouldn't be used casually. But here's what nobody could deny. Carter was right about one thing from the very beginning. If that K-9 deployed without cause, it wasn't just a bite, it was a case. Systemically, the incident forced changes. The city implemented a revised K-9 deployment policy, emphasizing that K-9 presence cannot be used solely for intimidation. Handlers were required to document specific threat factors before deployment. Supervisors were instructed to respond immediately to any K-9 bite incident, regardless of severity. And training emphasized that verbal provocation is not threat. Speech alone cannot justify force. Essentially, they made their officers take the kind of training that Carter, through painful experience, proved was necessary. Then another pattern emerged. After the video circulated internally, 2 civilians came forward with complaints about Russell from previous months. One involving a traffic stop where the dog was brought out early, another involving a trespass call where the handler allegedly used the dog to pressure compliance. Those complaints hadn't gone anywhere at the time. They were unsubstantiated. No video, conflicting statements. But now investigators had a new lens, a documented incident with a federal officer on camera with injury. It made older complaints harder to ignore. This raises a broader question. How many incidents only become real when the victim has status, connections, or video? Where are they now? Darius Carter returned to duty after healing, but the injury lingered. Bite wounds can cause nerve damage, grip weakness, and chronic pain. He completed physical therapy, he documented every limitation, and he used the incident to advocate for clearer interagency protocols. Because parking disputes should not turn into use of force incidents, especially between agencies supposedly on the same side. As for Mason Russell, he was no longer a K-9 handler, no longer on patrol. Last known status in this fictional account: resigned and under review in related proceedings that could affect future law enforcement employment. Whether he ever wore a badge again depended on what paperwork followed him and what agencies were willing to risk hiring a handler whose body cam showed retaliation language. Here's a question for you. If you were in Carter's position, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have stayed that controlled while being bitten? Comment below. Because the bigger picture isn't just about a marshal and a city cop. It's about power. It's about how quickly authority can become ego. And it's about how tools meant for protection, like K-9 units, can become instruments of punishment when accountability is weak. Most people don't know their rights in detail, and some authority figures count on that. They count on people being too scared or too intimidated to question them. But when someone does know the rules, when they speak calmly, insist on documentation, and refuse to be bullied, the power dynamic shifts. The uniform doesn't automatically win. The dog doesn't automatically justify force. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Now let's address the criticism you already know is coming. Some commenters would say Carter should have just backed away, kept his head down, avoided any argument. They'd say he talked too much. They'd say he should have immediately presented credentials, even if the officer said don't reach. They'd warn that any resistance, even verbal, could get you hurt. Here's the problem. The footage shows Carter trying to comply and being blocked from doing so. He asked how to identify himself. He asked for permission to retrieve credentials. He asked for space from the dog. Those are reasonable requests, and the handler escalated anyway. Yes, there are real risks in any police encounter. Carter knew that. He calculated those risks in real time, and he chose calm, visibility, and verbal documentation over sudden movements. That decision might have prevented the incident from becoming even more catastrophic. But the fact that exercising basic rights, like asking if you're detained, asking for a supervisor, asking an officer not to threaten you, is treated as dangerous, tells you everything you need to know about the deeper issue. So what are the takeaways? First, always assume you're being recorded and act like your calm will be the strongest evidence later, because it often is. Second, narrate your movements. If you have to reach for anything, say what you're doing before you do it. Third, request medical attention immediately after any use of force incident. Medical documentation is neutral evidence. Fourth, demand preservation of video early. Body cam systems overwrite. Security cameras loop. Time matters. Fifth, don't rely on verbal apologies. If something serious happens, file the formal complaint in writing, with timelines, names, and clear requests. And sixth, remember that escalation often isn't about law, it's about emotion. The moment you feel an encounter shifting into respect territory, slow down, create space, and prioritize safety and documentation. One parking space, one K-9 deployment, less than 10 minutes, and it triggered a federal review that changed careers. That's the power of restraint. That's the importance of accountability. That's what happens when someone refuses to be intimidated and insists on the rules. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-world style stories like this. And remember, this story matters because it's not just about Darius Carter and Mason Russell. It's about every person who's been threatened into silence. It's about every moment authority gets used to punish instead of protect. It's about the thin line between enforcement and abuse, and how quickly that line disappears when nobody is watching. Carter's story shows you can stay calm, you can document, you can demand accountability, and sometimes you can win. Not every story ends this way. Not every incident results in justice. Not every complaint leads to change. But this one did, and that matters. This is the story of how a police K-9 was released on a Black U.S. Marshal during a parking dispute, and how it opened a federal case. But more than that, it's a story about what happens when ego meets evidence. This story is for educational purposes only.